I think you can start. It's 5 past. So yeah.
Sure. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, whatever the time zone you guys are in. Okay. So, what we were doing now, what we were kind of reading about was graphical convolutional networks. So we will continue what we were doing 2 weeks 2 weeks ago. So just a quick recap what we were trying to do. We were doing a graph Laplacian. So basically, it is like a Fourier transform, and 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 that Laplacian was being factorized into using an eigenvalue decomposition and being factorized into uh, a set of matrices, and those matrices, one of them was the eigenvalues of the Laplacian itself, and then the eigenvectors. And then the eigenvectors, based on kind of relation with signal processing, the eigenvectors kind of correspond to the Fourier functions, and the eigenvalues correspond to the frequencies of the spectrum of the Laplacian itself. Yeah. Uh, and then after that, to kind of get a visual understanding of what a Fourier function or a Fourier transform would look like is, so any signal can be kind of decomposed uh, into orthonormal signals or orthogonal signals composed of various frequencies. Uh, like so, basically, so it's a kind of a linear combination of sinusoids of various frequencies. So, so all of those eigenvalues that we have seen that were being split over here, these eigenvalues would correspond to a certain frequency in the frequency domain. So that's why you have, if you notice here, we have 550, which is a DC signal or a constant value, and then phi 1, which is of the wavelength pi, and then phi 2, which is of the wavelength pi by 2. So that means you are increasing the frequencies, and then you have different, each eigenvalue corresponds to different frequencies in the frequency domain. And similarly, I mean, if it is applied to a graph domain, the way the various nodes of the graph are activated based on the eigenvalues is this. I mean, if it is a DC signal like 50, the whole graph is activated. In And then on the other side, you have phi 1, wherein part of the graph is activated for with a certain value, and then the other part is activated with a uh, different value. So probably, something opposite to what the red section uh, amplitude is, and so on and so forth. As you increase the frequency or the eigenvalues, you all sorts of amplitudes start appearing for a different set of nodes in the graph. So this is what we have done. So it's kind of a brief summary of that. And then after that, I mean, we have seen that how Fourier transform is done. Uh, so quickly, I repeat, if I can come to this slide. So what we have over here is as a convolution, as we have seen that you have a kernel W and a signal H. So when you convolve these two signals, this is not like a simple multiplication. I mean, this star signal here, if you notice, the star signal means that this is convolution. It's not a simple point by point multiplication. So wherein the kernel or the filter W is kind of slid over H, and during the sliding process, at each step, the point by point multiplication happens. But in the frequency domain, after the Fourier transform, it is a simple multiplication, a point-by-point multiplication, if you notice here, between the Fourier transform of the kernel W and the Fourier transform of the signal H that we have. Now, the signal H obviously means the H comes from the graph itself. So H could be the nodes, the set of nodes, or it could also be the set of edges. It could also mean the full graph itself. Based on that, we have this Fourier transform being found. And then after some linear algebraic operations, what we notice here is that if W is the kernel and W hat is the Fourier transform of it. Eventually, what we have is we have this kind of a mathematical expression wherein W hat of delta. Now, this delta is actually is the Laplacian, actually is the Fourier transform. It's basically the Laplacian delta times H. Now, I mean, if you notice, I mean, these two expressions are really important. Like we really have to understand these two expressions. I mean, this is the basis of whatever we discuss in the later slides. I mean, especially this particular expression wherein the Laplacian is split is factorized into its eigenvalues, matrix that is gamma, and the eigenvectors corresponding to those eigenvalues phi and phi transpose. So, I mean, conceptually speaking, I mean, whatever we do now in the next few slides, especially in the spectral domain, the learning happens for this particular expression. I mean, the kernel itself, W, and also the Fourier, the eigenvectors of this particular Laplacian. So we are learning two things over here. That is the kernel values W and the eigenvalues and the eigenvectors of this particular expression. So yeah, so this is about the convolution theorem. And yeah, so this is a slide wherein the professor discusses that in the Euclidean domain, especially in the spatial domain, actually, that the convolution that we do is not invariant. I mean, so whenever we do a convolution on any side of an image in the Euclidean domain, that is an image or probably a single 1D speech process, or probably in an NLP application where we have converted the words into a vector like word2vec or any other of those features. When we do a convolution, the convolution itself does not vary when we start convolving it with different in different areas of the grid of the signal itself, of the image or the speech that we have. But it's not the case in graph. So in spatial domain, I mean, for graphs, so you cannot guarantee. I mean, there is whenever we start convolving for different sections of the graph, the convolution process itself is. I mean, the process is the same, but it's not the same as doing it in one corner and the other. Okay, so this is the limitation that we have for graphs when a convolution happens in the spatial domain. Okay, so to begin with, the first time that we are seeing is of a graph convolution network is this, wherein this is, I mean, he refers to it as the vanilla GCN. I mean, this is the first vanilla GCN. I mean, later on, we also see another vanilla GCN based on the spatial convolution. But now here we are discussing the spectral convolution. And spectral in the sense, I mean, spectral comes from the word spectrum, and spectrum means frequencies. And so frequencies, because we are doing a Fourier transform and doing the convolution by multiplying, by doing a pointwise multiplication. So that's why, because Fourier transform, decomposes a signal into its frequencies. That's why it's called the frequency domain, and that's how the word spectral comes over there, I assume. So yeah, here in this, what's happening here uh, is that we have this equation wherein h of L plus 1 is the L plus 1 layer, and this is actually found by doing a convolution of the previous layer with a kernel, as we have seen in the previous, as we have done in the previous convolutional neural networks. This is pretty standard. And on top of that, we have a nonlinearity, that is eta. But then this convolution is not a straightforward convolution, as we have seen before, that is converted into a Fourier transform multiplication. And this Fourier transform multiplication, the Laplacian is split, is factorized into its eigenvalues and eigenvectors. And if I can kind of zoom it a little bit, so what's happening over here is that this W that we have is effectively a I mean, because this is a filter that we have. So in the frequency domain, it will obviously be called a spectral filter, and the spectral filter spans. I mean, because every filter has it's like this. If I can kind of do a kind of analogy between signal processing. So I mean, every signal has a frequency response, because you're doing a Fourier transform of it, and then when you have a Fourier frequency response, it is kind of distributed over a certain set of frequencies. So that's why this signal, or this filter W, the Fourier transform of it would be dependent, would kind of spread across the frequencies of whatever this W is composed of. Now here in this case, the frequencies corresponds to the eigenvalues of the Laplacian. So what's happening now here is effectively, we know the frequencies at which this W exists, but we don't know the amplitude of the W, the Fourier transform, the W hat. So effectively, what we are trying to do here is we are trying to learn the weights of the contribution that each of these frequencies or each of these eigenvalues have in this expression. So if you notice, I mean, because we have lambda n eigenvalues, we have to learn n parameters. So we are learning n weights or n amplitudes or n amplitudes for this filter. So it's kind of per layer we have to learn n parameters. So effectively we have to learn O of n parameters to learn per layer. So this is one limitation actually of this kind of a vanilla spectral GCN, wherein we like without any modification we start applying the Fourier transform immediately. But on the other hand as well, I mean, going forward, we also have to do a Fourier transform because the factorization is being done. And the Fourier transform, I mean, here the phi matrix is the set of eigenvalues, and this set of eigenvalues are involved during the learning process. And I mean, this is like a linear. So when you do a Fourier transform, I mean, one interpretation of a Fourier transform is that you have a Fourier transform matrix, and then you multiply it with a signal, a simple matrix multiplication. So that kind of gives you the Fourier transform of it. So this itself is a full n by n matrix. So during the learning process, we also have to go through this Fourier transform, because we have to find out the Fourier transform itself. So when you find out the Fourier transform, you have to do a matrix multiplication involving the Fourier coefficients, or the Fourier sorry, the eigenvectors, uh, and that's a matrix multiplication of n by n. So the learning complexity becomes n square. So here in this case, so these two are the limitations, and then the other limitation, as we have seen before, that there is no there is no guarantee of spatial localization. So the behavior of this filter here in the graph would be different from other sections of it. So these are the limitations of a vanilla spectral DCN. So what I understand here is, because I mean, once we have this particular, if you start kind of relating this to the backpropagation algorithm, so this is like the forward pass of it, I assume, and the backward pass would be as we have done before, wherein we start finding out the gradients at each layer. One thing that I've noticed over here, I mean, as part of the GCNs, it's not like when I was reading this paper, actually, when I was reading this paper, which was referred to by the professor, which is referred here in the bottom. So what I noticed was, I mean, it's not like, I mean, like how we are used to when we, like when a VGG network is designed, we have multiple layers of convolution with max pooling, different sizes of convolution layers, like a proper network architecture wherein we can kind of visualize that. But here, I mean, in GCN, what I've noticed is that we don't have an architecture per se. I mean, it's an architecture, but in the sense that you only start applying convolutions to the input signal being the full graph itself. So the papers that I've seen until now, they don't mention the architecture as we have seen that we are used to. Like in VGG, or probably like a transformer network, wherein we say that we have dozens of layers, and wherein the network, the signal is passing through each layer, and then later on at the end we have a dense layer, and then later probably an SVM itself. But here they don't really define an architecture, but they define how many convolutions and what sort of pooling is being done. So this is what I've noticed. I mean, I was trying to search for architectures for a GCN, for a GCN, but I didn't find any. But then it's just a combination. It's just kind of multiple applications of this W, recursively on HL, H of L plus 1, L plus 2, and so on and so forth. Okay, so this is about spectral GCNs and the limitations of it. So the limitations are this: we have n parameters to learn per layer and n square learning complexity, and this becomes very difficult. I mean, because when you have massive graphs, it becomes very difficult to do a computation. And even this paper hasn't kind of really done the tests on something very large, but on the MNIST data set, which was kind of a 32 by 32 pixel image. So they've kind of done this on a very small scale, and they are kind of aware of the fact that this kind of an approach would be very difficult when you start approaching large graphs, like social network size graphs. So this is what they have kind of listed in their paper. So next comes the spline GCN, which kind of tries to solve that problem of the number of parameters to learn per layer. Now here, what we have here is we are learning this particular W, right? I mean, we are learning the W. This W, which is in the frequency domain, we have lambda 1 to lambda lambda 0 or lambda to lambda 10. That is the eigen values of this W. But here, what there is a concept in Fourier transform, is that uh, I mean, have you like, for example, you probably might have heard about something called as white noise. So white noise is basically a signal which has every possible frequency starting from 0 to infinity. So it's kind of a combination of, very large number of frequencies. So when you have this kind of a signal, so now, because when you have large frequency signal, I mean, when you have a large number of frequencies in a signal, it means that it is kind of spread out in the frequency domain. So corresponding to that, if you do an inverse Fourier transform and find out the signal in the frequency in the time domain or in the spatial domain, this is a very thin signal in time. It's probably a few seconds. So there is something called as a delta function, which is uh, a delta function is a very sharp signal in time domain or in spatial domain, with very little spread, a very infinitesimal spread. So that corresponds to, in the frequency domain, the full frequency spectrum starting from 0 to infinity. So I mean, like, when you do a frequency analysis, like, for example, if you are studying an antenna, so generally antenna design of an antenna is kind of, tuned to a certain band of frequencies, like antenna of a cell phone, for example, like a GSM band signal. So when you try to characterize an antenna, at what frequencies they work, because you're not really sure when you design an antenna at what frequencies it works. So you have to kind of understand by sending a signal with all frequencies through it and see what passes and what does not. So uh, to how do you create this signal with very large number of frequencies, is that you have an extremely thin, extremely sharp signal in time domain, which means that it is, it's pretty much spread out in frequency domain. It has all frequencies. And then depending upon that, when you have all frequencies, only the frequencies at which the antenna is capable of, resonating, it starts resonating only at those frequencies. And everything else is kind of, attenuated. So, so in the previous vanilla spectral GCN, this was the concept, I mean, wherein the signal was wide and it was kind of, very sharp in frequency domain. So it's like this. So if the signal is wide enough in frequency, it'll be very sharp in time or spatial domain. Or if it is very wide in time in time or spatial domain, it will be very sharp in the frequency domain. So it's kind of an inverse relation over there. So what these guys what these two people try to do these two papers try to do is that they kind of define, instead of having something to learn out of the blue over here, like W, they try to define a certain signals in the frequency domain, and based on that they would want to learn the W of it, the amplitude of those signals in the frequency domain. uh, so what happens here is, when it is smooth, or meaning that when it is kind of wide, a smooth signal in the frequency domain, it means that it is pretty sharp in the time domain, and the number of coefficients that are to be learned also reduces to k, because you're just defining a certain number of signals that are to be learned. So here, by doing that, by defining by fixing the number of the signals to learn in the frequency domain, you're kind of fixing how many parameters that this particular network has to learn. So effectively, they're reducing the parameters to learn to O of 1, and also the filters are localized in space. So, meaning they're fast decaying, or also it means they're pretty localized or pretty sharply defined in frequent in time domain. So it's not like a very large filter as we have seen over here. I mean, if you notice, I mean, relatively this is a large filter in space. If you notice here, this is a smaller one covering smaller amount of nodes. So which means that it is kind of spread out in the frequency domain. But then you're not kind of trying to, but this does not really solve the problem of the Fourier transform itself, wherein you have to do a full matrix multiplication while doing the Fourier transform during the forward pass itself. So there is, this problem is not solved. So you have this n square learning complexity. So what I've talked about the smoothness, about the width of the signal and frequency and time. This is actually part of something called as Parseval's identity. So it's effectively this, that whenever a signal is localized in time, it is kind of spread out in time or space. It is kind of spread out in frequency domain. Okay, so that's the issue here, that you still have this complexity, and then when you kind of when you start doing it over very large networks or very large graphs, it becomes very difficult to learn, or very difficult to learn. So they've come up with something called as lab GCNs. This is actually a paper by the professor himself, and I mean, obviously, I mean, because this is his paper, he kind of discusses, very in detail. I mean, he kind of dedicates 3 slides to it rather than the previous ones. So here, as we have seen that the learning complexity comes from the Fourier transform itself. So what these guys have done is, why not avoid this Fourier transform business and the eigen decomposition and all of that, and then start learning the Laplacian itself. So this is what they have kind of come up with, and also, I mean, I didn't really understand the concept of one hop or two hop, wherein he talks about one hop supports, especially because I wasn't really clear about what supports are. It's probably something mathematical. I was just kind of looking up in Google. I mean, it says it's something related to mathematical analysis, but I didn't really understand what a support is. If someone have understood what a support is, if they can share, that would be very helpful. So yeah, so here the professor says that I mean, he kind of splits. He takes this Laplacian over here, and he tries to learn the Laplacian itself rather than fixing the Laplacian and doing the eigen decomposition. So he creates this linear combination, this kind of a function wherein the coefficients are learned, the W itself, the WK in the spatial domain, are learned during backpropagation itself, rather than learning after you find out the eigenvectors and the eigenvalues. So this kind of reduces, and also, I mean, using this, he comes up, because as we have seen, when you start learning the Laplacian, and if you remember, when we split, when the Laplacian was decomposed in this section, we had or factorized. This was a combination of eigenvectors and eigenvalues. So the eigenvectors and the eigenvalues, I mean, especially the eigenvectors, they are generally orthogonal. I mean, they are orthogonal. The space in which they are generally orthogonal. So there is a kind of a constraint that is being imposed by using using the Laplacian. But now, because we are kind of doing away with the Laplacian and trying to learn the Laplacian itself, there has to be a certain amount there has to be a certain constraint that has to be put on it. You cannot learn the Laplacian, in depth without any constraint. So it will give you all sorts of random, probably random kind of functions, but you need to be also take into consideration that uh, when you do a Laplacian, if you split that, if you decompose it, you must be able to decompose it in using orthogonal signals or the orthogonal eigenvectors that we have seen. So to put that into the system, into the learning process here, they use something called as recursive equations. I mean, recursive equations are basically a way of generating orthogonal functions. So, I mean, if someone has done engineering, mathematics, or signal processing, I mean, these are kind of they're very there are kind of popular recursive equations which help in generating orthogonal functions. So you put that constraint over here during this the learning process, and you kind of fix that fix the domain in which this particular this GCN is learning. And yeah, so with this, I mean, they try to solve this issue of the Fourier transform and the n square. Now the sequence xk generated by multiplying a matrix delta and a vector xk. So now the complexity is kind of reduced to O of n. O of n in the sense that you are just learning wk. So you are just learning uh, wk or effectively k parameters per layer, and then the multiplication that follows the during the forward pass or the backward pass of this particular formulation is that it's not n square, but it's of n. Okay, so this is this is what GCN is about. And also the professor mentions that the graph convolutional layers are sparse linear operations, and thus they are not thus they are, I mean, thus they're GPU friend. They are linear operations. They are GPU friendly, but because of the sparsity, they are not optimized. I mean, the current hardware is not optimized to deal with sparse linear operations. I mean, they are optimized to deal with dense linear operations, but not with the sparsity that comes with graph convolution layers. I mean, he was pretty specific even during the question answer session that uh, the current hardware is not really optimized to deal with sparse linear operations, and that could be a very big bottleneck for the adoption for further progress in this area of research. Yes, and yeah, so this is a little more detail on how the x or the recursive equations are kind of factored into. And yeah, so this is how the lab DCNs are. I mean, like, this all of these papers are extremely mathematical in nature. I mean, it kind of consumes a lot of time and really kind of difficult to understand quickly. This is what I felt, going through these papers the last couple of weeks. And I mean, obviously, as with any of these papers, I mean, they assume that you have the full background knowledge of all of these, uh, all of these techniques and the reasons why an XK is used, or whatever technique they're using, the background of it. So that makes it difficult for you, for at least I found it very difficult to kind of to really kind of absorb the reason why all of this is being used. But then I kind of understood a real high level overview of it, but not the specific details of these papers. And yeah, so here there is another issue. It seems, I mean, because I haven't really understood this particular statement. We have solved the issue of the number of parameters to learn, that is O of 1. We have solved the issue of the learning complexity from n square to n. But then the professor says that the monomial bases are unstable, so under coefficient perturbations, and they're hard to optimize. So I didn't really understand by the meaning of this. So probably because when he uses the word basis, uh, so eigenvectors were the basis. That is, they are orthogonal, orthogonal functions or orthogonal, vectors for that particular matrix. So they are unstable, he says, under the coefficient perturbation. So I didn't understand really, didn't kind of really grasp under coefficients perturbation. If someone can, throw light on this.
I think so. I maybe a bit wrong here, but the perturbations that happen simply due to the fact of change in the basis. Uh, I think so. What they are trying to say is, th- it's hard to optimize since I think so. They will have to change the basis, or uh, there might be some perturbation which, uh, suppose, how do I let me try to draw some aspect of it. Uh, yeah. Suppose this is your uh, and this is the base of x and y, and I try to perturbate this particular point which is here vector, uh, like suppose this guy here, uh, uh, to this vector, and so this might be the perturbation, and uh, this the here we can see the bases are the same. I mean the x and the y axis on which this uh, eigen vector is defined here. So I think so. What they mean here is by if I try to change the base of it with respect to this guy here, then suppose I have it this vector like this, or something like this, which is a bit different. And if the bases are changed to here with respect to this and this, suppose, so there the that base is unstable. So the uh, x and the y axis, the base on which this eigenvector is defined is unstable. Uh, if you guys get what I'm trying to draw, or
Okay,
share, yeah.
sure.
It's yeah, it's a simple representation of when here they are trying to change the base, or we are only referring to the base of a particular eigenvector in a particular uh, manifold. If that manifold is like changed a bit, perturbed or added, and we have added some noise. I think so. This representation, the change of bases and the vectors that are associated with it are very well demonstrated in the three blue, one brown series. uh, I might try to find a particular video which they are trying to represent. But yep, they have a, complete vector and a matrices representation of how the change of basis with respect to a particular noise affect the transformation that they are trying to make happen. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you, Mayank, for that. I mean, by just looking at this, what I've understood, what I also see is that, I mean, previously the basis were the eigenvectors. Now we have a function kind of a basis using these recursive equations that we have, that the professor defines. And instead of eigenvectors, we have a monomial. I mean, so basically we have a function basis now, and this function basis is is monomial function means probably it only has one variable in it. So as he
Hmm.
has mentioned it over here, it's 1x, x square or x cube. And perturbation probably would be the perturbations or the gradients that we find during the back propagation.
Hmm.
Because I mean, if you go to the next, if you see, if you go forward in the
Hmm.
next slides, previously there wasn't any kind of restriction on what these recursive functions could be, okay, except that they have to be orthogonal. But now he's using now, yeah, and they were monomials. I mean, like they were monomial functions.
Hmm.
But now with an improvement of choosing another kind of recursive function, but that should be a polynomial of the Chebyshev kind. So it's a again, this is coming from the signal processing world, wherein you can generate orthogonal functions. But
Hmm.
here now we are generating polynomials. Uh, so the professor says that because of this being a polynomial, probably because here it was a monomial. Now because this being a polynomial, it could be stable under coefficients perturbation. So I mean, I don't really know the reason why, but this is what the difference over here is. I mean, previously we had a monomial recursive function, monomial basis, having only one sort of kind of a variable x, but now we have a polynomial of Chebyshev kind, and those form the basis of the Laplacian
Hmm.
that is being learned, and they are apparently stable under coefficient perturbation. Now, coefficient perturbation uh, could be like how Mayank explained. I mean, and it kind of similarly translates it, into the into the gradients that we find in the back propagation while learning. Okay. So in the next slide, they discuss about so this the Chebyshev polynomial based GCNs. He calls them Chebnets, and yeah, and they test it over MNIST, and they also kind of prove that this is of linear complexity, and all sorts of testing and accuracy analysis is being done over here. They compare it with LeNet, that has a 99.33% accuracy. The SplineNet, the one that we have seen previously, has a 97.75% accuracy. The ChebNet has a 99.14. So it has a comparable performance with the LeNet, on which TMS was first tested. Yeah, and apart from that, there is one important concept is being introduced over here about isotropy and anisotropy. So the professor says that the standard coordinates that we are used to, the convolution neural networks that we have seen, they are anisotropic. Anisotropic means that they have a particular direction. Uh, Direction in the sense, once you do a convolution operation on a signal, or an image, the weights that are being learned, they have a certain direction itself in space. So I mean, if I start moving from the center and start moving outwards radially, if I go in the x direction, for example, the variation of the weights is different than compared to if I go on the y direction. So this is anisotropy. So there is a certain form of direction in the weights that are being learned in standard coordinates because of the Euclidean, nature of the information. But here in the graph convolution, spectral convolution networks like Chebnets, the filters are isotropic. That is because there is no notion of direction. Because in an image, as we have seen before, that you can define that this is like the left side of the image, or this is the right side, this is the bottom, this is the bottom side, or the left bottom of the image. But in a graph, it's impossible to define direction. So if someone says this is the 10th node, I mean, I could say that could be probably the 100th node. So there is no sense of direction in graphs. So that's why the spectral convolutional nets in graphs, when they learn, they are isotropic in nature. That is, there is no notion of directions. So I mean, if I start from the center point and move radially out, the way the weights are changing is the same in all directions when I move along x or along y or along negative y or negative x. So this is important actually as we go forward. Okay, and here he also kind of extends this Chebnets for multiple graphs. Again, I mean, all of these papers are very, very mathematically heavy. I kind of didn't really understand the mathematical nature of it, but it's an application of the Chebnets for the Netflix recommendation task, wherein multiple graphs were tested, like multiple graphs in the sense the graph of movies and the graph of users itself, and it was applied, simultaneously, and the weights were learned for these two graphs together, and yeah, and this is how Chebnets were applied for this particular application. And there is another one. I mean, all of these, starting from lab GCNs, it's all variations of what sort of basis you start choosing. So the first basis in lab GCN that we have seen was a monomial. In the Chebnet, it was a Chebyshev polynomial. Here it's a Cayley rational function. So it's kind of dealing with this with the stability and the learning process that we have in these networks. So they have the same. I mean, why do we do Cayley nets? I mean, they have the same property as Chebnet, but they are localized in frequency, as we have seen before. But then again, because this is a different class of basis function, there is the richer class of filters. I mean, you have various other ways of generating orthogonal basis functions. That's why we have a richer class of filters over here with the same order. And again, this we have, as we have seen before, this is an isotropic model, isotropic filter. Okay, so now comes, I mean, until now that we have seen is we have been dealing with convolution in the frequency domain. Frequency domain in the sense that it was being Fourier transformed. Either we were doing the Laplacian, doing the decomposition, and then learning the weights of the eigenvectors, eigenvalues, or we were kind of learning the Laplacian function itself, and by constraining ourselves or to the basis, to the orthogonal basis, either through a monomial function or through a Chebyshev polynomial or through a Cayley rational function. So they were all kind of based on the concept of using the Fourier transform and doing a pointwise multiplication in the frequency domain. But now we are coming back to the spatial domain, as we have been doing in the traditional convolutional neural networks. So now here here the professor kind of says that, we kind of come back to the original way of doing convolution that we are used to, wherein we take the template matching, concept of convolution. So the main issue, I mean, like as you've seen in the previous couple of slides, when it is about isotropic nets, that there is no particular index for a node of a graph. I mean, for someone it could be the first node, for someone it could probably be the 10th node. So there is kind of no ordering of node or no particular position which is fixed for a node. And that's why, I mean, it's not the same information, when you do convolution also. So the solution to that is using a feature vector, the same feature vector for all neighbors. I mean, you use the same a feature vector could probably be of size d by 1. This is kind of multiplied with all of the same all the nodes within the neighborhood of this particular node that we are targeting for the convolution. And so this is what we have been doing even in the regular CNN that we have studied until now. So it's basically an inner product of the weights or the features of this feature vector W with the neighboring nodes, and then with obviously with the non-linearity over here. But then when you're doing it over all of these nodes for the whole graph, you need to have a bigger W value. Sorry, a matrix W instead of a vector W, a small w. We have a matrix capital W over here, uppercase W, and which gives us the features coming out from the previous layers. And there is one thing which I didn't really understand, that the professor nicely slides in this adjacency matrix over here, but really didn't explain why this adjacency matrix comes over here. If someone might have gone through this, if they can jump in and explain why why are we multiplying this template matching with A? Or probably because we are converting this summation because adjacency matrix defines the neighbors of a node, neighborhood of a node. So that's why this A kind of replaces the summation over here.
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, that's it's basically, you take the adjacency matrix as your input, because now you're in the in the normal domain, not in the frequency domain.
Yes.
And then you multiply by the weight matrix for that layer and hidden L. Okay, so the previous layer's hidden. It's kind of like the RNN kind of deal, I think. Right, you take the L from the previous layer. So you're basically starting from a node and advancing outwards, right? So each hop is like one of the L's, right? So L plus one is like two neighbors out from your original starting point, and L is one hop out. So in that sense, I guess you can think of it.
Probably, yeah. And there is one more thing. I mean, if you have noticed over here, I mean, the Lth layer is of the size n by d, and after the convolution operation, the size remains the same, n by d. So this was kind of, I felt this to be a little counterintuitive to the regular convolution that we have, done until now, wherein the size of the output after a convolution, obviously starts decreasing to a smaller size than the previous layer. If it is depending upon if you do a same size convolution, you don't do a same size convolution. So this felt a little counterintuitive to me. I mean, because it's not kind of hierarchical in the sense that how the regular convolution CNN, does. I mean, this is what I've kind of understood over here.
Yeah, it remains flat here, right? I mean, CNNs will get smaller and deeper, right?
Deeper, yes.
Whereas in this case, it's like a two-dimension thing. It starts with 2 dimensions, and regardless of how far you go out from your original thing, yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I never realized that. That's cool.
So this is what kind of this kind of when I was thinking of architecture, figures for architectures within the papers. I mean, like how we are used to seeing the architecture of a VGG or a ResNet or any sort of those traditional convolutional neural networks. I didn't really find any architecture design, all of those nice layer by layer design of neural nets. But here, I mean, I didn't really find. So that kind of led me to closely look into the sizes of it, and the size never changed over here. So probably it kind of depends on how deep a network is, depending on how many times you start applying the convolutional neural network. The convolution operation.
Well, one point to notice is graph is always going to be a two-dimensional thing, right?
Yeah, that's for sure.
Right. So no channels. So that's the
Okay, so this is what template matching is about, and this is how they try to do convolution on graphs. I mean, when I came to this slide, I kind of realized and the professor also says that this is the way majority of all the other this is the most commonly used method of doing convolution in the scientific literature. So then I realized, I mean, why have I been studying until now regarding the spectral convolution? I mean, what was the point itself of doing all of that and then coming back to this, coming back to the basics of CNN itself? So that kind of really struck me. I mean, what was the reason of all of that spectral domain CNN? Okay.
I have some insight from this is from the CS 224W class, which is all about graphs. So spectral decomposition is kind of a big thing, pre neural networks or pre graph neural networks, right? So essentially, the idea is, well, at least this is the kind of an idea I've taken. If you ignore all the advancements, right? Essentially, you're creating a Laplacian out of your adjacency matrix. So the degree matrix and your adjacency matrix are combined to form a Laplacian, and that has so just like you made the point that there is no positional information, right? So node 1 can be 1 by somebody and 10 by somebody else, depending on where you start counting. So whereas once you convert it to a Laplacian, because you're injecting all the degree information, it becomes relatively less variant or more invariant in that sense, right? In the positional sense. And then you can apply traditional convolutions. You can treat it like an image almost, and go with all the Fourier stuff that you're doing, right? So you then transfer it and into Fourier, so it kind of now separates out the components and makes it easier to work with, similar to eigen decomposition, right? So,
yes.
So that was the thing I took away from it, but that's probably
probably because when I at the end of this class in the video, Jan kind of makes a comment, one very I don't know if it was a sarcastic comment or what sort of, I don't know really what he kind of pointed out to the background of the professor himself. I mean, he said that his thesis advisor of the Professor X, Professor Xavier's advisor was quite popular in the signal processing domain, and even the Professor Xavier's background is kind of based in the signal processing area, and it was quite natural for him to kind of start applying these techniques in graph from the perspective of a spectral domain, and then come back to this template matching. He kind of makes it put this, says this probably that kind of probably relates to why he has been discussing all of that, and then he comes to this particular,
Could be.
template matching.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is what template matching is. I mean, again, this is invariant to node. Yeah, I mean, like node reparameterization. Parameterization means the node for one person, if it is one, it could be 10 for someone else. I mean, I mean, the template matching must be invariant to that, which can simply use the same template features for all the neighbors. So this is kind of solves this issue of invariance, not being invariant in spatial domain. Okay, so coming to so I kind of lost my train of thought. Yes, yeah. So here we have another type of vanilla GCN based on isotropic understanding, isotropic design of the filters. Again, I mean, it's here. The way it's being done here is that he introduces this D vector, the D inverse vector, which is equal to finding the average of all of the nodes, the output of all of the nodes, and this is the basic GCN with template matching. This is how they deal with different neighborhood sizes. So the moment you have an average, all of those are combined. All of the nodes contribution is combined into one value, and the effect of node reparameterization is kind of effectively solved in this way, wherein you kind of combine this into one number. And he also discusses, I mean, apart from this being the average, I mean, we could also do something called as by thresholding or finding the maximum of all the nodes, neighborhood nodes. So effectively kind of solving the issue of node reparameterization for template matching. Okay. So this is the simplest. Again, this is the vanilla GCN in the spatial, the spatial domain. And again, this is independent of the graph size, because you're just dealing with the neighborhood within a smaller neighborhood of a node, and the same thing is applied over all the other neighborhoods of all the other nodes. And this is again isotropic in the sense that it is invariant. If you there is no particular direction in the weights which this particular convolution learns. Okay, and yeah, so here, I mean, he says that, I mean, this is like again a way of interpreting Chebnets that we have seen originally in spectral filtering, wherein the vanilla GCNs are basically a way of simplified Chebyshev's polynomial based GCN. And he comes up with this very, very complex, at least for me, it's complex to understand, this Chebnets. So it's a simplification of that. Yes. I mean, if you notice here, I mean, this is again, all of those recursive operations. I mean, it tries to kind of justify, probably, this is how, when he discusses that this is a simplification of Chebnet, there is some sort of a mathematical or some sort of a reaffirmation that, the way the vanilla GCNs in the spatial domain is being done is kind of, consistent with what was being done in the spectral domain as well. So the nearest that he kind of goes to is the Chebyshevy's polynomial-based spectral convolution.
One thing to notice here is, on the right side, it says width, right? So
Yes.
if you notice that the Laplacian is defined as 1 minus d to the power minus half, a
Yes.
d to the power
Yes.
minus half, right?
Yes.
This is actually a standard, it's the formula for a normalized Laplacian.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
Laplacian is just a minus d or d minus
Yes.
a, one of the two, right?
Correct. Perfect.
Right?
Perfect. Yes.
So if you just now, plug that in, you will find
Yes.
that the output of the Chebyshev spectral convolution and this one, the GCN, they look very, very similar.
Yes.
Right. So that's that I think that's where he's drawing the parallel. That
Parallel,
in
exactly.
spite of going through all this, the Fourier transform and everything, you ultimately end up with the same thing.
Same thing. Yeah. So yeah, as you have said, I mean, if you do a plugin over here in this line, it eventually comes back to this. So but the sign is being flipped here for some reason, and then got it. Okay, fine. Okay, yeah, perfect. And then he talks about a popular graph convolution neural network, a particular design of it, wherein the template weights are not constant, but they depend between the weights of the neighbors itself. I mean, so it's not a constant weight that it has. So I assume when he says that, this is the weights are being differentiated. In the previous ones, the weights were constant. So now the weights are different for different neighbors of the central node. And this is kind of similar to a kind of an LSTM understanding of this, it seems. So it gives better results than the previous, vanilla-based GCNs. And again, here the weights being different also means that the adjacency matrix in the previous GCNs, they were not kind of weighted; they were just constant. But here in this particular case, there is a certain weight between the connections of the nodes. Okay, if someone has to add on this.
Please go on. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Okay, so in this, he again kind of goes to explain something called as graph isomorphism networks, GINs. So here again, he kind of talks about isomorphism is not an equivalent relation for similar graph structures. So, I mean, isomorphic graphs are graphs which have, similar relative connections and similar location of nodes. And and here he kind of says that, when you start applying batch normalization and ReLU, the nonlinearity to it, this again kind of preserves the isomorphism in the networks itself. So I mean, this kind of led me to really, again, I mean, if you see here, the size of the network does not change. The size of the features don't change. Starting from d by 1, it is again, d by 1. Okay, so this is what isomorphism.
Okay, one more thing, sorry. So I was again, we are doing very similar things in the graph thing in the CS224, and the lecturer Leskovic, basically he went through the exact same three architectures, right? The vanilla GCN, the stage, and the GIN, right? And one point he made, which was very very interesting, is that it's the formula which changes, and it's how powerful, how expressive the formula is, right? So in case of the vanilla GCN, they're using mean pooling, so which means that
Yes.
if you have edges, with one set, and you have another node with edges which are exactly double that, mean pooling will not actually see that, right? Because you have
true. Yeah.
So in that sense, it has a weakness, right? The Graph Sage uses max pooling. So it actually suffers from one other issue, which I forget now, right? So, but whereas the Gin, it kind of takes ideas from both and does some, right? It pulls, it doesn't try to divide by by a numerator, not normalize. Because of that, it has another expressive power. So it's actually quite interesting. I mean, each of them have, and I'm sorry, I actually don't remember all that stuff I read, but they are expressive in their own different ways, and each of them have feelings.
Got it. Yeah. If you see here, I mean, this particular expression, it's mean pooling. I mean, this D vector over here, this D matrix. The moment you do a multiplication, it's basically an average of all the nodes that you're doing. So it's the mean of it. And probably with Graph Sage, because we are considering the weights, it comes out to be could come out to be like a max pooling equivalent here. Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so now we were dealing with isotropic GCNs. Now we talk about anisotropic GCNs, wherein there is a structure in the weights. There is a direction in the weights that the convolution layer learns. And the professor says that having a direction in the filters itself is something that must be desired, and it's something which kind of helps us in helps the convolution neural network to kind of be very expressive rather than having arbitrary graphs with isotropic filters. So how to get back anisotropic back to GNNs is using the natural edge features. I mean, there are a couple of papers which talk about this. Using the natural edge features. I mean, different weights between the nodes. Because the moment you have different weights between the nodes, that starts giving us the direction in the convolution layer that we have that we learned. I mean, if you can kind of relate this to an image. I mean, for example, if we have if this is one pixel, this is another pixel. This could be the like, for example, if it is someone's face, if it is if this pixel is on the edge of someone's face, so this pixel is this pixel would correspond to the pixel outside the face, and this would be something inside the face within the facial facial structure. So the weights of connecting between these two pixels and these two would be different. So this is what I felt like having direction or anisotropy in the convolution neural. So I mean, the convolution neural network must be able to kind of detect these this kind of a difference in pixel values or basically the edge of a facial structure. So, and also this also applies to between different connections between the connections of atoms, like bond sizes, probably different bond energies of different molecules. I mean, if this is a different molecule, this is a different molecule, this is another molecule. Obviously, I mean, this the edge or the bond energy between these two would be different from this two. So we have some sort of a direction over here. It's not a constant, vanilla GCN type of understanding wherein the adjacency matrix is common, always one between the nodes. Okay, so there are we have these multiple papers which talk about this, about attention mechanism, gated attention networks, gated GCNs. which kind of treat neighbors differently with different weights, which eventually gives us direction. Okay, so the next model that the professor discusses is about monads, which leverage Bayesian Gaussian mixture model. So effectively, each of these connections that are there between nodes are modeled using a Bayesian mixture model, GMM. So this kind of provides us because you cannot kind of fix a weight here. I mean, this is a small graph. I mean, if you have a very large graph, it obviously the values of these weights, they have, if you have different weights, you have to do some sort of a statistical treatment to it. So and how do you do that, and how do you figure out what kind of weights the edge weights must be? So one way of doing it probably is using the Bayesian Gaussian mixture model. Uh, so yeah, so this is how monads kind of learn direction in the edges. Yeah, so if someone has to add on this, please feel free. Okay. And then going to graph attention networks, wherein the GAT uses the attention mechanism. So this is something similar to the transformers, that we have been studying in the previous lectures. Again, this is a way of introducing and learning the edges or the nodes, the features of the graph, the of the graph and the convolution and the weights of the convolution operation itself. So there is a graph attention network as well. If someone has to add on this as well, I mean, please feel free to add, jump in. And
yep. There are, I think so, other than GAT, in which here they employ a multi-headed architecture. There is right now some recent research on the different type of uh, 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 attention mechanisms that can be employed on a graphs. So yeah, I think so. Which have because the bottleneck here will be with respect to each of the heads, as in uh, if we talk about the scalability here, then yeah, since it's dependent upon the number of head that can be aggregated, or that kind of a message passing strategy that is being implemented here. So that's one drawback that I had with the attention that is being used in GAT. Yeah, and yep,
okay.
yeah.
Okay, so going forward, there is another way of doing this. There is gated graph convex, wherein the edge gates can be regarded as soft tension process. Uh, there is a paper from 2014 and 2017 which kind of do a description, which kind of talk about this. Uh, and I mean here, this is kind of particularly important to note that all of this particular network is uh, have the edge features which are explicit. So this could probably, because from my understanding of what I've done until now in this area, uh, what I've studied until this area, the edge features are explicit in the sense that the importance for edge prediction tasks. So this could probably be useful for for predicting what sort of bond energies could be possible between between molecules So this could particularly be useful when you're doing, protein type of, predicting protein structures uh, with the molecules that are available. Uh, and then this process actually, improve the learning speed, and they also kind of generalize well, uh, uh, apparently uh, because of the sigmoid function that is being utilized over here. Yeah, this is about gated graph convex. And then there is a graph version of transformers. I mean, this had to come. I mean, there's all sorts of analogies being drawn, from other domains. And so this paper kind of, I mean, like, transformer itself is a graph, is a way of is some sort of graph itself, wherein the learning process happens by uh, uh, by using query key and the attention mechanism that is available. But still, I mean, I'm still not clear. I mean, if you have noticed here about one hop neighborhood, and also in the spectral domain as well, in the Laplacian LabGCN, the professor talks about the neighborhood, about one hop and k hop neighborhoods. So probably if someone can understand that, they have understood, probably if they can jump in and explain this particular, one hop neighborhood, why is this, important to be
can.
mentioned over here?
I can. So at least I can try. So,
Yeah, sure.
so basically, just like a convolution. So each layer of convolutions, right? You basically slide your little moving window, and then you come up with a one level of summarization, if you will, right, from the previous layer, right?
Yes.
So in that sense, so here you're looking, so at each at each convolution across the entire graph, the next layer that you get on your GCN, on your the graph neural network, whatever it is basically a representation of, it's like a convolve of, you kind of represent each node in your original graph with another super node, which kind of takes into account the neighbors, one hop neighbors of the previous graph, right?
Yeah.
And then you go to the next layer where you again expand this, this bigger node, which contained, information about not only each node, but also its neighbors, into another node, or another super node, which is bigger, and which contains not only the information about the original node, but also its neighbors and its neighbors' right?
Okay.
And so on and so forth. So at each stage, you are getting a bigger and bigger approximation of each node, right? Where all the inputs from its neighbors come in and make it more, representative of the graph as a whole.
Okay. Yeah. So each layer kind of, takes into consideration the one outer layer.
Exactly.
Sorry, one outer layer, one outer hop. And yeah, so if you have done that k times, you kind of effectively reach the kth hop of that central node that you were targeting.
Right. And if your diameter is, say, say D, right? After a few hops, if you have reached D, then you haven't looked at the entire graph, right? Effectively, you are representing the entire graph.
Got it.
There is a nice explanation of this from where I got it from. I will post it in the chat. Let me find it.
Sure.
Continue, and I'll just post it.
Fine, sure. Okay, so this is about graph transformers. And then again, they go on to discuss about transformers itself. I mean, transformers is a special case of GCN when the graph is fully connected. So, so here again, this kind of an understanding, or this kind of an interpretation or analogy had to come. I mean, we kind of start doing all of these analogies, and graph is also a fully is a special case of transformers. In the sense, because I'm not really kind of good at transformers. I'm still kind of figuring out what transformers are. So if someone can really kind of jump in, if they have understood the slide, it would be very, very, helpful. Okay. So yeah. So what I can say is that graph is a fully when the graph is fully connected, this becomes a special case of I mean transformers are a special case of GCN. During the question answer session of the classes video, I mean the professor talks about when a graph is fully connected, or probably during this slide itself. I mean, when he says that when the graph is fully connected, there is no apparent information that we're getting out of it because every node is connected to every other node. So, so this is not kind of a really useful kind of a graph wherein everything is connected to each other. So he makes this particular point, which I kind of picked up from there. Yeah. So this is about transformers being a special case of GCN. Yeah, again, it's the same thing because transformers are popular. The professor kind of goes on to talk about it, and he says that transformers are a set of neural networks, and they are today the best technique to analyze or sets of backup features, as for NLPs that we have seen. So yeah, here he mentions that I mean, what does it mean to have a fully graph fully connected? That it means it's less useful to talk about graphs at each point. As each data point is connected to all the other points, there is no particular graph structure that can be used. So when we are doing a convolution, as you have seen until now, so there is some sort of a graph structure that we're exploiting, wherein one node is connected to few other nodes, its neighbors, but not all the other nodes, and that kind of also gives us the information on how that particular graph is structured. So here he says that it would be better to talk about sets rather than graphs in this case, and transformers are set of are a set of neural networks. If someone can jump in and explain this, that would be very helpful. Still kind of figuring out what transformers are. Okay, yeah. So this is probably the end of the presentation. The almost the end of it. So there is a Google Colab as well. But then again, this would be probably discussed next week when we do the practicum. Something's gone.
You have to open it Colab. This is opening with whatever
with
notepad or something. Yeah.
Exactly, yes. Probably. Okay. I need to kind of save it in my with no. Probably I need to okay.
Yeah, if you just I think go to Colab and open it, that might be better.
Yeah, that would be easier. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is coming into my way now. I might have to switch to my account. I'm sorry, I'm not able to figure out.
No,
Okay.
open with, and then there should be Colab there. No.
Yes, no, it's not that. I mean, on my different laptop.
Or you can take
open.
the right click and basically get the link, or get the link from here,
Okay.
right? And then drop it in the that opening thing that you had, right? You remember the box you got with the link?
This one?
Well, this should work. I mean, well, this actually asks you to install, right? So if you go back to your Colab screen, so you, and then there was like an open something file, maybe. Yeah, this one, right? Here you drop the URL for the Google Drive.
Yeah, probably. Let's see.
Yeah, whatever the URL is, go back to that, pick it up. Yeah, there. Okay, try it now.
So probably I have to save this in my Google Drive and then open it from there.
Maybe or yeah.
Yeah. I mean, this is coming into the way a lot, and this is disturbing me. Okay.
Or if you go back to your slide and right click the URL that you have on the slide, that should also do it, right? That will be an HTTP URL. Yeah, there.
Right click.
And copy it.
I'll probably select and copy it from here. Okay, so now I think I'm signed into my open with Google Colab. Perfect. Yeah, it was an issue of accounts.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is a lab demo which the professor says that will be part of the discussion with the practicum class itself. So he kind of basically goes into which probably we will discuss it next week, coming week. So here he kind of goes through the details and each step by step understanding of it's kind of doing a graph neural network from scratch, and he implements a gated CNN, and they do a pop and all of the details. I mean, this looks interesting. I mean, the next week would be much more interesting, wherein we kind of look into because I mean, until now, if you have noticed, we haven't really seen how a forward pass and a backward pass would work in a graph convolution neural network. We haven't kind of really gone through that. So this would really help us really understand how all of these DNNs are trained. Okay, if someone has tried this, if they want to jump in and add something to it, they can. Okay. Yeah, so this is about this about gated GCN being implemented in here. Okay, so this is an explanation of what the lab gated the code talks about, and yeah, so we'll probably go into the details of it next week. Yeah, so here he talks about benchmarking GNNs. I mean, he says that currently there are no proper way of benchmarking a graphical neural network that are being researched. So they have come up with certain techniques, certain kind of standards for benchmarking. The professor and his research lab on how to benchmark DNNs. So what they have said, they have come up with 6 new medium scale data sets and also 4 fundamental graph problems. I mean, the graph classification itself, graph regression, node classification, and edge classification. So these are kind of the 4 tasks, like how we have tasks in NLP or tasks in a computer vision problem. So corresponding to that, we have a certain number of tasks here, which is a graph classification, graph regression in the sense what could be the numerical value that you could get out of a graph. And within that, you have node classification. I mean, to what class a particular node belongs to, and also the edge itself. I mean, to what class an edge it belongs to. What I noticed here is that I didn't see that they haven't talked about node regression or edge regression. If someone can explain, I mean, if someone has because my understanding is that edge classification. I mean, I understand edges, they could belong to a certain class, but when you do especially in a chemistry type of problem, when you're kind of trying to understand the energies between 2 nodes or 2 molecules, you need to have some sort of a regression as well, because you have to have a certain value or numerical value attached to it. So that would also be a problem which is possible, or I am kind of misinterpreting that. So they haven't really kind of not talked about edge regression or node regression.
That is a good point. Although edge. So the only thing I know about edge is basically link prediction. So whether an edge is there or not. But you bring up a very, very interesting point, right? I mean, this is definitely a valid task. Predict the strength of the bond, right?
Strength of the bond, exactly. Or whether a bond is there or not is a classification, and but then what sort of bond we have in between. I mean, there could be multiple types of bond. It could be a covalent, it could be a double, single bond. All of those, I mean, so probably some sort of a numerical value attached to it. I don't know. I mean, it could be there.
Yeah, but maybe if you can say that here are the different kinds of bonds, and then if you can classify them as one of the k different kinds of possible bonds, then from there you can use domain knowledge to predict the strength of the bond, right? So that is also
that could be one way of it's possible. I mean, that could be. Okay, so and then there is also a GitHub repo of it regarding the benchmarks. Can just go through it about the benchmarking. So this is kind of a new kind of ecosystem developing for graphs and graph convolutional networks and benchmarking of it. So probably this is just the beginning of it. So this would probably see a much more growth going forward. Okay. And then there was one specific question actually within this class that we have talked about all the theory about graph neural networks, but how do you really kind of do all of this? So this is kind of a separate video which was kind of put into kind of concatenated into this original video, which kind of broadly explains how the GNN pipeline looks like. You have an input layer, which is kind of a linear embedding or input node or edge features, which is kind of something similar to what we have seen in NLP type applications. And then you apply the GNN layers to it, whatever GNN layer that you want to apply, that is, you apply it L times, for example. And then at the end, you have a task-based layer, something similar to a classification layer or a regression layer at the end of a deep neural network. So effectively, it's the same, but it's kind of a combination of all of this. I mean, we have an input layer. It kind of embeds our node into features, our edge into features, our graph itself into features. And then later you have GNN layers, which kind of you apply it L times. Again, I mean, he says that GNN layer L times. Again, it kind of I'm still trying to make that relation, kind of this kind of analogy. Do we have VGG type architecture definitions for GNN graph neural networks? I'm still kind of trying to kind of understand whether it's possible or not.
It's analogous, but not the same. And actually, read that blog post by Thomas Kipp. it's actually pretty good, right? That'll give you a very good, that's where I got my message passing, the whole idea of, the graph convolutions, how it works and so forth.
Okay. Just make a quick note. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, here it kind of goes into the details of how the input layer behaves. You have an input node, you have an embedding layer. It kind of embeds the features, you convert the input h into its feature vector, corresponding feature vector. This is pretty standard. If there are n nodes, when you do a conversion from h to its feature vector, you have n nodes, each feature vector of size d. So effectively, you have after embedding, the size of the matrix would be n by d. And if it is an edge, if you have e edges, if each feature vector is of size d, then that would be e by d. So this is something which I can relate to from the previous convolution neural network. From the NLP, type applications where we kind of convert our text to with an embedding layer into its features itself. And then you have the GNN layers, wherein you take in the feature vector that we have, previously found out, and then you apply the GNN layers L times, and then effectively you get the output of this feature vector, this GNN. Again, if you notice here, it's again of the size n by d, and the size of the even the sizes the size remains the same effectively from the time you give the input and the output as well. So this is slightly different, which I felt from the regular CNN, and this has to be kind of looked into. If someone can have an explanation.
One other, yeah, actually, I just thought of something here. So if you think of the input graph, right, it's generally quite sparse, right? So it's the denseness is only kind of, as far as what the edges are, right? So if you have like, 5,000 nodes, but only, and maybe about 200 clusters inside that, right? So they're all little clusters and they're not all connected to each other, right? So you have basically a sparse representation. So if you think in analogously to text, right? Text is similar. It has sparse, right? One-hot vectors. So you can think of your input as like one-hot vectors, kind of. And then once you send it through, n convolutions of your GNN, you end up with dense vectors, right? Exactly the same dense vectors that you would get from, say, passing it through an embedding layer, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And, you now have each word, or in text, in case of text, rather than being like a one-hot thing, now it's like a dense vector, and it gets all the distributional context from other words, right?
Yes.
Similarly, each node that you have now, the n by d, right? So now you have a d-dimensional representation of each node, which is dense and which contains the context from the other nodes.
Yes, true.
Right. So now this can be used for classification tasks or whatever other tasks you want, right? So more effective to do such things there with dense nodes, dense representations.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Fine. Okay, and then and then you have the last layer, the task-based layer, whether you have to do a graph level prediction. It's a regression of classification based on the score that we have. It could be a multi-layer perceptron, or he just talks about MLP here. Probably we could have another type of task-based layer. It could be other simple machine learning type algorithms here as well, probably. And then you have node level prediction as well. Based on a score, you can do a regression or a classification, and edge level prediction as well. Again, based on the score, you can do a regression and classification. Yeah. So here if you see here, there is a regression and classification for the edges. Yes, there is.
Right.
Actually, there is, but it's not part of the benchmarking. Maybe they would come up with something, or someone else would come up with the regression-based benchmarking for edges and nodes also. Could be. Okay. So the next part is the application of it in quantum chemistry, wherein they kind of test out he talks about a paper of 2018 wherein they test out a zinc datasets for prediction of molecular properties. So this is one very good application, and the other applications is in computer vision and NIST and CIFAR. I mean, these are small data sets relative to uh, what the general, PGD nets and all of those deep neural networks have been, doing. And then there is the node classification. I mean, the standard uh, clustering task as well, and someone has kind of tested that as well. And then about combinatorial optimization as well, wherein I guess I'm not really sure about this, but I've read it somewhere that traveling salesman problem is a problem. It's a very, very difficult problem to solve. It's a which has a very, very wide solution space, and it does not have a closed form solution. And this is a difficult task to solve. And if someone can, briefly explain what a TSP is, it would be really helpful. So yeah, so it has been used to also solve the TSP problem. And I mean, if you notice in all of these, in all of these, in tests, consistently, the time utilized or the time taken to solve these networks is always, extremely high, especially the graph when you compare, like for example, if you compare the gated GCN, it takes 128.39 seconds per epoch, but if you use a simple MLP, it uses 21.82 seconds. So again, this kind of points out to the fact that these are very sparse linear operations, and the current architecture, the current hardware is not optimized to solve these very quickly. Even though it's parallelized, I mean, even these operations are done in parallel at the GPU level, but then it's not optimized for the sparse operation. So I mean, it's again the same. I mean, if you notice here, it's 115 seconds. It takes for an epoch. Here it takes around 8.68 seconds for an MLP.
Yeah, I think the question here is how much you are willing to pay for the extra signal, right? I mean, you can get, almost as good results with straight up classification or straight up regression. But now that you have the extra graph signal, you can go like a few points higher. Now, and from problem to problem, it will vary how many points higher, right? And and that's, I think, where the decision point is basically, right? How much are you willing to pay, and how much benefit are you going to get?
Right?
Yeah. So,
yeah, because I mean, all of these, big companies, they have these tech companies, they have access to very large access to resources. Obviously, even a small percentage increase in accuracy or performance would probably have them translate into very massive,
that's basically because of volume, though, right?
Volume,
I mean,
exactly.
if you can save or if you can increase performance by 1% over billions of requests, I mean, that's a huge benefit.
That's a huge gain. Yeah. So these are various kind of problems in which the graphs have been applied to, and they've kind of performed. I mean, if you notice, I mean, they have performed very well when compared to the MLPs, the traditional MLPs and the KNN heuristic. But then I would be really interested to see. I mean, because I guess TSP is a very well looked at problem. I mean, people have been trying to solve this since ages, and there would be very other traditional algorithms which have been used to solve these problems. But he does a comparison with KNN in this paper. I would be kind of really interested to see if someone does a very comprehensive analysis and see how this problem can be solved using the traditional methods, and then when compared to graph GNNs. Okay, and yeah, this was a simple plugin by him about a workshop. This happened last year. When I checked for this year, it already happened in February. the IPAM workshop. Yeah, and then that's it. This is the conclusion. I mean, he kind of goes into the summary of it. The generalization of coordinates on graphs have been done. We have redesigned the convolution operator on graphs. And graphs have a universal learning capacity. I mean, it should be, you should kind of really look into this particular line of universal learning capacity, especially in the end of the video where the question answer session is kind of very informative. Even Jan Lipkan is also part of it and kind of discuss about this particular point about universal learning capacity. And obviously, I mean, for this, they have all sorts of applications ranging from social networks to brain, modeling of brains, or graphics in transportation, in physics type problems, in chemistry type problems. And yeah, so this is probably the end of it. And there are some tutorials on graph deep learning, which kind of points out to, kind of goes into the history of graph neural networks workshops, and he talks about this is his team, I guess, and this is the end of the presentation. Okay, so yeah, so we are kind of close to 2 hours now. I guess we have 5 more minutes. If there is something else you guys want to discuss, we can discuss.
I just had a quick comment on the transformers thing.
Sure.
The transformers and the transformers as a GCN, right?
Mhm.
So in transformers, the main thing is attention, and
Yes.
so in attention, each word can be related to every other word in the whole sentence, right?
Sure.
So that is why the graph is considered as a fully connected one, right?
Yes.
That's how it
In
makes
this
sense to
case,
me.
yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. True. Perfect. Yeah.
Since each word can have attention to every other word, so it's a fully connected graph.
Yes.
And since fully connected graph is, it's not really a useful graph structure, so it doesn't make sense to do a normal GC and
Across the entire graph.
yeah,
That makes sense.
yeah, it doesn't make sense to do GCN on it. That's why we just consider them as sets and do the transformer style of thing.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's how it made sense to me. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, because I haven't kind of really, I'm still kind of learning transformers. I probably need a couple of more kind of revisions and reviews to really kind of absorb this transformers thing. Yeah. So that's it from my side. And thank you for listening.
Yeah, we'll probably have to end this soon.
Sure.
Yeah, thanks, Tayyab. This was definitely the hardest lecture in the series. So
Yeah.
thanks for the effort, and
Sure.
yeah, it was
Welcome.
really useful. Yeah.
Very
Thanks,
helpful.
Sujit,
All right,
as
thank
well
you.
for all the insights and everything. Yeah.
Sure. All right.
Thank you guys.
Thanks,
Thank you
everyone.
for listening. Thank you
Yeah,
for
sure.
bearing.
All right. Bye, guys.